It's one of the largest dams in the world, and it's being severely tested by the worst floods China has seen in decades. The Three Gorges Dam was once a source of great national pride. But what impact do such mega projects have on people and the environment? And how is Beijing now reconsidering how it manages rivers? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. It's been described as a once-in-a-generation event. Floods have swamped large parts of southern and central China after the worst torrential rains in decades. Many people are dead or missing, whole villages are inundated, and millions of people displaced. The economic losses in dollars are believed to be in the billions. Nearly 2 months of intense rains have swelled 433 rivers, with water in some reaching record levels. The Chinese authorities have raised flood alerts and deployed soldiers to evacuate people and shore up levees. Seasonal rains are common in China, but this year's flooding has been exceptional and early. Some environmentalists blame climate change, and others are raising concerns about the country's dams. Amongst them is the Three Gorges. That has been struggling with extreme flows of water. Well, China began building the dam in 1994 and completed it in 2006 at great expense. It's the world's largest hydroelectric station with the capacity to generate 22,500 megawatts of power. The project was part of the Chinese government's investment in mega dams to contain overflows of water, irrigate crops and produce energy. The reservoir is designed to prevent Asia's longest river, the Yangtze, from flooding. But it's been condemned by environmentalists who say it's damaged the river's ecology and forced millions of people to relocate. Critics also question its durability and criticise the Chinese government for pouring money into large-scale infrastructure projects whilst neglecting smaller ones that are decades old and need maintenance. Let's get the thoughts of our guests now. And joining us in Beijing, Dan Wang. She's an analyst at the Economist Intelligence Unit's Access China Service. And in Canberra, Peter Macaulay. He's an associate professor at the Australian National University and author of Banking on the Future of Asia and the Pacific. A very warm welcome to both of you to the programme. Dan, a lot of nervous eyes on the Yangtze River Basin. How serious is the situation there?
Because there's a lack of official data in describing the actual economic loss. We did some rough back-of-the-envelope calculation, and it looks like, although on the surface it is very devastating for us to see all those dislocation of people and the damage to houses, comparing to the 1998 flood, this time is only about 15% of the economic loss and about 1/10 of the direct damage to housing. So now we have the economic GDP growth for 2020 to be about 1.4%. With this flood, it's about, we would only adjust down our GDP forecast by 0.05 percentage points. So the economic loss is actually marginal compared to 20 years ago.
OK, so that's slightly encouraging. As you say, it is only the economy side of things. But the national emergency level is still only at its second highest, isn't it? Does Beijing expect it to get worse? Because there's still an amount of weeks left in the rainy season.
Yes, absolutely. That's the biggest concern. And also because this year we know that the economic situation after coronavirus is already very severe. And we have seen a worsened job market already in the 4 provinces that are hit the most, especially Hubei and Jiangxi. And we have seen a rising prices of agricultural products and also steel, because those provinces are the main produce producers and also steel producers. And if we have another round of flood or several more days of rain, like in the biggest days last month, then we will be in serious trouble.
And then just to get an idea, we are expecting more rain, aren't we?
Yes, we do.
OK. Peter, why are we seeing these floods? They may not be as bad as the worst on record, but they're certainly the worst in decades.
Well, of course, there are some people who say that these sorts of events are indicators of climate change. I'm not sure, really. I don't think that we can conclude that. It may be true. It may be true, but this sort of climate change issue I mean, we get lots of incidents around the world in other parts of Asia, Southeast Asia, India, and Africa, and so on. And people are inclined to point to climate change. My impression is that we're really looking at separate episodes. Now, that's not to say that climate change is not important. Climate change clearly is important, but we do get severe weather anyway, whether there's climate change or not. And this would appear to be a severe weather episode, most unfortunate, of course, but it is basically a natural disaster.
Okay.
There are frequently natural disasters in other parts of Asia, and this is what it would appear to be. Of course, it's very serious for the region.
Okay, well, let's look at the management of it. There are some 94,000 dams in this Yangtze River basin. Peter, do you believe they're helping the situation or exacerbating it?
Look, it's very hard to say. I believe that on balance, they are improving the situation. But it's a very complicated system, obviously, as you say. If you have thousands of dams, the whole ecology of the river systems are changed. So you're really moving from a situation 100 years ago when there were almost no dams to an entirely different situation. And of course, the whole business of constructing infrastructure has occurred all around the world. And indeed, in Western countries have much more infrastructure than China has. China is still actually short of infrastructure, believe it or not. And I guess China just has to build infrastructure, and it will have to somehow manage these systems. But clearly it's difficult. There's no question that it's very difficult.
Absolutely. And Dan, how difficult is it to manage all these dams? I mean, we're looking at some of them that were built in the 1950s and the 1960s and are in need of maintenance. They're on much smaller tributaries, they're small dikes. But how closely are they all being monitored?
As far as I know, that many of the dams are actually very much underused. And also because along the Yangtze River, there are many of those dams that were built a long time ago. And we have seen various reports that there were basically no maintenance for many of the smaller size of the dams. Of course, the Three Gorges Dam is a very crucial part of this whole project, so it is under closer scrutiny. But even so, we have seen that in sections of the Three Gorges Dam, there are already some sign that it may not be able to hold further rains if it happens. So I would say that maybe along the Yangtze River, it could use another round of infrastructure upgrade. And that could be another ambition that the central government need to think about, because right now there are a lot of voices talking about those dams are damaging the local environment, not just to referring to the fishes, the species that those dams are intercepting their normal route. So some of the species are entirely wiped out, but also those dams are changing the local weather. So we have seen certain villages, they're having very extreme weathers comparing to 20 years ago. So they have more droughts and more floods comparing to when they had when there were no dam. So it's really hard to see now that whether those dams are justified for them to be built in the first place.
OK, so you mentioned the Three Gorges Dam. I'm going to get back to that in just a moment. Before we do, Peter, just sticking with these smaller dams that are upriver of the larger behemoth project on the Yangtze, do they need an upgrade? Is there time to upgrade them before the stress on the Three Gorges gets too great for it to bear?
Well, first, we don't have enough information about all of them, but the chances are that they certainly do need upgrades. Maintenance of infrastructure in all developing countries across Asia tends to be neglected, unfortunately. There's often a preference for new projects, such as the Three Gorges Dam itself, rather than maintenance. But the trouble with maintenance is that it will take a long time. It can't be done quickly. We're looking at 3, 5, in some cases 10 years because, as you say, there are thousands of them, and to upgrade and improve these things is not an easy task. So there's no quick fix here, and the risk is that they do need more attention, but that's something that we'll have to wait for some time yet.
Dan mentioned there the Three Gorges Dam, which has come under a lot of stress. Beijing has admitted that it's, quote, deformed slightly. What's your understanding of the damage that's been done to it?
I haven't seen the reports from Beijing. What is clear is that this is a severe stress for the dam. This would appear to be the first really major test that it has gone through. It was completed. It was completed in 2006 and has had some upgrades to parts of it since then. But this is the first severe test, and so in that sense, this week, the next week, the next few weeks are a very important time, not just for the region, not just for the provinces, not just for the Yangtze area itself, but of course it's a testing time for China overall, because the Yangtze Dam is a worldwide recognized project. It's a top-class project for China, and if the dam comes through, if the dam survives well, that's a feather in the cap for China. It's very good for China, but if it doesn't, it's certainly an embarrassment.
Absolutely. Dan, let's just look at some of the figures, because they're astonishing. The water rose up to 163.5 metres last week at the dam. The dam itself is only 185 metres high. And people are saying, we've said it here today already in the discussion, that the flooding from the upper Yangtze has not yet fully hit. So others trying to get some sense as to how concerned people in Beijing are about this.
I think the authorities are absolutely watching very closely to how this flood could evolve in the coming week. But I do think there is a relative optimism among the Beijing authorities, because comparing to 20 years ago, China does have much better capacity to monitor weather and also the change in the river, in the flood. So there is some base that there could be more rains in the future, but it could be contained by the end of the summer. If the worst situation happens, then I think the central government would do similar things, what it did 20 years ago. It would dislocate all those villagers that could be under threat of the coming flood and move them to other nearby provinces. So this has been done before, and the authorities have some experiences. So I'm not actually too concerned this thing could be out of control.
I mean, that is an interesting point you raised there, because the Chinese State Council's contingency plan is exactly that, isn't it? If the dam looks like it's going to burst, then they will move all those local areas and sacrifice them, if you will, to mitigate the greater effects downstream. We're looking at the huge city of Wuhan with its tens of millions of people. But you're talking still about millions of people losing their lands, losing their livelihoods, losing industry in that area. It's going to be a huge deal.
It is, and it will be quite devastating for many of those people, especially this year. It's very hard to find jobs or other ways of living in a different city or in a different township. So for me, it just looks like it has to be the farmers or the low-income groups that always bear the cost of such kind of disaster. In some cases, this can turn out to be a good thing in the long term, because if the flood happens this year, just like the Hurricane Katrina happens in New Orleans, if we move people earlier on, it can reduce the economic loss and other losses in the future. And for Chinese government, I think it is the way they manage this kind of dislocation. Sometimes it's too crude, and that could hurt a lot of people. But if it is a managed dislocation, I think normally for Chinese people, since they respect authorities, they usually have the collective type of thinking, and they would normally obey. And it's usually peaceful.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you raised, Dan. Peter, do you agree with it, that it can be a managed dislocation, that people will accept the situation if they've lost all their livelihoods and there's already very depressed economic situation in the area, and people only reach a certain amount of breaking point, don't they?
Yes, these things are hard to judge. There are both shorter term and longer term effects. In the short term, people may well cooperate. In fact, they have little choice. But of course, over time, there are a range of difficulties that unfold. As Dan has pointed out, when you shift 10 or 20 million people, when you shift very large numbers of people, they have to go somewhere. They have to be absorbed somewhere. And it's not always easy to absorb people in other areas. There are often tensions when newcomers arrive. And the tensions are both short-term and longer term, because if they stay, they look for jobs. And as Dan has pointed out, the economic situation in China overall at present is pretty difficult. It's a stressful time. So you've got one crisis on top of another crisis. Now, at the end of the day, I guess, people have to if they have to shift, they have to shift. But the costs are high, and both the short and longer term effects will be felt. There's one other point I'd make about this. Dan mentioned early on that the overall impact for the Chinese economy will probably be slight from this. And I might say that's our experience with disasters elsewhere. It's a curious thing, disasters attract a lot of attention. I did some work on the huge tsunami disaster in Indonesia, in the tip of Sumatra, in Aceh. At the time, that seemed 100,000 people were killed. At the time, the tsunami seemed a major event. But when you came back a year or so later and looked at the economics of it, it did not affect the overall economy. So the real impact of disasters is usually local. And that's what I think we're seeing here. There will be a big local effect. That's up, and the local area is a very large area, up and down the Yangtze, hundreds, even thousands of kilometres. So that in that sense, the event will be a very large effect, but it probably won't show up really in the economic statistics on the economy overall.
Okay. Dan, let's look at the economic benefit that the dam has brought. It was touted as providing huge amounts of energy, electricity to China. Has it reached its potential?
I've heard different reports that the dam, the Three Gorges Dam, still have more potential in generating electricity. And as far as we can tell, that originally the purpose of building the dam was actually to control the flood. And now it seems that it has served the purpose of providing enough power for factories along the Yangtze River, and kind of in a way help China to become the center of the global manufacturing. But now this function seems quite limited. And I've also heard that the central government is talking about in various conferences about changing the strategy over the role of the Three Gorges Dam, because it can't just be used as a giant power station. It's supposed to be helping the local economy more. So now one direction is to develop its shipping capacity. So we can see that all the bridges now along the Yangtze River Delta are being renovated or upgraded so that eventually the giant ships from the sea in the east can go directly to Chongqing. And if this can be done, it will be another, I would say, a renovation or a second spring to use the Three Gorges Dam. And that could be a very promising future.
Keeping it relevant, so to speak, because also Beijing, the Communist Party, has been looking at a new draft law, hasn't it, in the way that it protects the Yangtze and manages the river ecosystem. And indeed, it's the first legislation on a specific river basin. What exactly does it involve? Is it a greener, a more holistic approach to using the river and managing its ecology and environment?
This is quite consistent with China's strategy to go green. And its environmental regulation has been upgraded several times in the past 5 years. And I think this new legislation is quite targeted to the Yangtze River, also partly because China wants to develop or redevelop the Yangtze River Delta and all those provinces along the Yangtze River to make it a new engine for China's economy. And the environmental related industries is a big part of it. So I would say it is quite uplifting to see this kind of initiative, but there is not enough stress in this legislation on protecting the local ecological system. When it comes to specific animal species, I still think there is understatement on how important they are to local climate and to the global ecological system. So that should be improved, but I think it will be a very long-term plan.
Peter, the government did admit that its so-called, what they call the mother river has, quote, fallen ill. How would you like to see the river basin managed?
These are often major problems with major rivers. There's another huge river that has problems as well, the Mekong River, which flows out of China with lots of damming. So you've got similar problems. There has been a tendency in the past to focus on engineering aspects and this is worldwide really, it isn't just China, but it's certainly the case in China, to focus on the engineering aspects and to not pay enough attention to environmental and social aspects of projects. Now, this of course makes projects a lot more difficult, but along the Yangtze it would appear that much more attention needs to be given to environmental and social aspects in future. There has already been quite a lot of discussion about environmental problems up and down the Yangtze, and this is one of the challenges. We know that China has a major challenge in so-called going green. China's energy use has been rising quickly, but it has brought social costs. Now, China seems to have taken a decision to slow the overall growth rate. Of course, it's plunged dramatically recently, but there has been a switch towards more emphasis on both environmental and social aspects, perhaps more environmental than social at present. But these are huge challenges for China looking ahead. They are huge, and the Chinese leaders, I think, so far as I can see, clearly recognize them. But China is still a developing country. It has many challenges, and both of these things, of environmental and social aspects, need more attention.
Absolutely, and balancing the economic aspect too. Dan, do you think we'll ever see another mega project like the Three Gorges Dam in China again?
I think so. There's a very high chance because aside from being an electricity generator, actually the Three Gorges Dam does a lot more than that, which also include to strengthen the role of the state-owned companies for China. Because during its process of construction, actually the Three Gorges Dam has helped to revive many of the state-owned enterprises. Back then, about 60% of the input used to build this dam has to be purchased from domestic sources. And I've known quite a few large state-owned companies. For example, the Xi'an Electric Machinery, it was on the verge of going bankruptcy, but because it was the only company back then in China that can produce the full set of power generator. So it basically got enough order from the Three Gorges Dam project, and then it survived. So by building those giant projects, infrastructure projects, China is not just trying to generate growth and create jobs, it is also trying to create this group of state-backed companies that can help China to grow in the future and have competition, competitive power in the world. And in a way, this would also help China to upgrade its technology, because many of the research institutions would use those infrastructures as testing bed for their new equipment or new technology. And this has become one of the key strategy for China's central authorities as well. Yeah, the more it builds, the actually better.
We're going to have to leave it there. It's been a really interesting discussion. Thanks very much to both our guests for joining us, Dan Wang and Peter Macaulay. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.